Young lad, righteous. War can't buy great. Then craft man so full of technique. Make him feel like someone good and then alright. Show up at them night, cause we hard clean. Enough of them say them a do it, but them not do it like we. On them no for what them hear about. Warrior they are to what them hear about. Open up it, they can make it hear out. Anybody in the way them a feel clear out. Like switched up.
Hey everyone, today I present What if Sasuke Uchiha was in high school DXD? Part 3. Now please enjoy. The only thing left of the first Yakuza squad was a few piles of ash scattered around the rear of the church. Sasuke could only assume that something similar to Rainier's light ability had been used to kill them, given he was unable to locate any scorch marks similar to what a large-scale fire attack would cause. The second team he found no signs of. They were likely either captured or disposed of elsewhere. Normally, he would have spent more time searching, for thoroughness if nothing else, but the cacophony of noise erupting from the church dissuaded that idea. From the lack of gunfire and the booming sound he assumed was some sort of magic, it was likely a clash between at least two of the three supernatural factions. Unsheathing his katana and laying it across his knees, Sasuke immediately dropped into a meditative pose. It had been some time since he entered into a serious battle, and he liked to center himself when he had the time to prepare. Mentally he took the opportunity to review his most potent techniques in his head, mentally running scenarios in which he used them. His Sharingan allowed perfect recall of both techniques and the battles in which he had seen or used them, a useful feature when his mind contained so many after years as an active shinobi. As the 5-minute mark came and went, Sasuke immediately used a shunshin to enter through one of the already broken windows and observe the fight from the shadows high in the church rafters. It appeared that Rias and Sona had bitten off more than they could chew. On one side was a badly battered Rias, fighting back-to-back with Akinoa against a fallen angel. At this point it appeared the fallen angel was toying with them, smirking in triumph as he adjusted his top hat of all things. Sona and her peerage were fighting with the rest of Rio's peerage against a group of 5 other fallen angels. Well, fighting would be a generous description. Barely surviving would be more accurate. The fallen angels were obviously toying with their prey and clearly had the upper hand in the encounter. Perhaps the most curious thing was located in the pulpit of the church. A beautiful blonde was currently in a position of crucifixion. It was obvious from the various incense and other implements that some barbaric ritual had been interrupted, likely by the arrival of the devil peerages. Unfortunately, her glazed over look told Sasuke she was close to death. Judging by her appearance, Sasuke surmised she was the mysterious girl the local Yakuza had attempted to track down and exploit for her alleged powers of healing. While Sasuke was tempted to force Sona into using her leverage to summon him and thereby absolve himself of his debt, he decided against it for multiple reasons. First, the blonde's potential value interested him. He hated not having any ninja healers on this world. It made things more dangerous in general since the local healing consisted of literally sticking a band-aid on things most of the time. If he waited for things to play out before intervening, it was likely the crucified girl would die. Secondly, he had to admit that his truce with Rias and Sona had been useful to him thus far. His appearance to save them without any prompting would give him leverage in their future dealings. Finally, as much as he hated the devils, he hated the fallen angels even more. The devils were a twisty lot that tricked humans into unfair contracts, which Sasuke had a major problem with. What annoyed him even more though was the high and mighty attitude of the fallen angels that manifested in them exterminating humans like they were a plague of vermin. As much as he continued to despise most devils on principle, at least they did not see the need to eradicate humans on general principle. The best part? The fallen angels seemed to enjoy themselves as they murdered those they were once tasked to protect. Activating his Dojutsu, Sasuke held his hand out towards the angel in the top hat. Banshotenin. The fallen angel yelped in surprise as he was separated from his hat and pulled towards the rafters at a breakneck pace. Sasuke grabbed the shocked fallen angel by the collar using chakra-enhanced strength and slammed his head on the iron beam repeatedly until he went limp. With surgical precision, Sasuke curb-stomped both legs and one of the dark wings even as the stunned fallen angel screamed in agony. Throwing the leader of the group to the ground in a heap, Sasuke met the startled yet relieved gaze of Rias as Akino doubled over to catch her breath. Giving her a brief nod, Sasuke turned around just in time to see 5 light spears headed towards him. Path. A shimmering blue shield erupted around Sasuke that sucked the light in hungrily, filling Sasuke with even more energy than when he began the fight. Harnessing the raw energy into an overpowered Shunshin, Sasuke was a blur as his katana hungrily reaped the head of the fallen angel fighting Sona. Sensing the change in the fight, the devils all redoubled their efforts in attacking the remaining shell-shocked fallen angels. Sona, focus on one enemy and leave the rest to me, Sasuke commanded even as he squared off with the remaining fallen angels. Always quick to adapt, Sona simply nodded and ordered both Peerages to focus their fire on the fallen angel farthest from Sasuke, a buxom brunette that snarled and punched one of Sona's Peerage straight through a wall in response. Obviously, playtime was over, a shame it was too late for that. Even as the small horde of devils herded the brunette fallen angel away from Sasuke and the remaining 3 enemies, the 3 fallen engaged their wings and hovered 20 feet off the floor. What are you, stranger? No mere human could have so easily handled Don Azik and Renault. Why are we talking, you idiot? Let's kill him and be done with it. Indeed, why are we wasting time when a threat stands before us? Obviously, there was very little cohesion or consensus in this group of theirs. While Sasuke was usually open to using subterfuge to trick his enemies into spilling their secrets to him, it was not necessary here. He had no doubt that these fallen were the replacements for Rainier, likely carrying on whatever other mission she had been assigned along with killing Issei. More importantly, there was no reason to talk with the help when he had left the leader alive for just such a purpose. Unfortunately for the fallen angels, none of Sasuke's allies were in his line of fire and the enemies were at an angle roughly 45 degrees above him. Thus, there was no reason to hold back. Fire style, majestic destroyer flame. A hellish inferno arose from Sasuke's mouth and quickly engulfed the 3 remaining fallen angels, instantly turning them to ash even as the massive fireball destroyed the entire back of the ruined church and continued out into the night sky like a solar flare, lighting up the entire night sky before dissipating. Sasuke turned to see everyone present staring at him, then at the remainder of the wall, then back at him with an odd expression. Raising a single eyebrow, Sasuke dusted off his shoulder with complete nonchalance as some of the falling ash fell like snow. The final fallen angel was trembling as she stared at Sasuke, obviously never encountering something so far above her own supposedly exalted existence. The brunette immediately flared her wings to escape, only to be instantly attacked by all the devils still able to fight. Kiba weaved a web of steel as he crossed swords with the light beam she wielded, while Akino and Sona's queen used their considerable powers to keep her on the defensive. Rias and Sona began charging an ominous combination attack. Sasuke adopted a board stance and leaned on one of the supporting pillars holding up what was left of the balcony section, content to let the fight play out. If the devils could not take out a single fallen angel between them, he had concerns regarding their future survival chances. Besides, it was only fair he get to observe them with his Sharingan after showing them a few of the cards up his sleeve. The fight took a depressingly long time to resolve considering it was nearly 10-on-1. The fallen angel had gotten increasingly desperate and pulled some truly nasty attacks from her arsenal, including a dark energy attack that had immediately corroded a large hole through the floor after barely missing Akino. With a shout of effort, Rias and Sona's combined attack of dark red ice both froze and disintegrated the brunette fallen angel simultaneously, leaving a black smear behind as the attack burrowed through the remaining wall to the outside air. Both peerages collapsed in a panting heap as Sona and Rias fussed over them, using basic healing magic to stabilize their more grievous wounds. Kiba had the most grievous wound of all, A hole burned straight through his vitals by a light spirit attack that was continuing to poison him and cause significant pain after both Rios and Sona had worked to stabilize him. Akino grabbed Kiba in a bridal-style hold and created a portal despite his protests, explaining that she was going somewhere private to heal him. Sasuke was curious as to why she couldn't just do it here. She was a strange one at times. As most of the devils teleported out to deal with their various wounds, Sasuke cut down the blonde from her precarious position on the wooden cross and administered first aid. She was very close to death and there was likely nothing he could do for her. Sasuke frowned as some troubling puzzle pieces fell into place in his mind. While he was grateful the devils had disrupted whatever ritual the fallen angels were conducting, he wondered just how long they had known about what was going on. The whole thing seemed eerily similar to Issei's situation, given that the blonde with alleged exotic powers currently resided at Death's store and the devils just happened to be on hand to provide a convenient solution. Rios and Sona walked up to Sasuke and to his surprise began to immediately use their healing magic on the blonde girl at his feet. After a few minutes of strenuous effort with little change in the blonde's condition, Rios slumped over and was caught by Sona. "I'm sorry Sasuke-san, there is nothing more that we can do for her outside of her peerage. I know this appears overly convenient for us, but you must realize how badly Asia-chan was damaged. It appears Don Azik and his followers were attempting to extract her sacred gear Twilight Healing from her and were mostly successful. It is coming back to her now, but the process was so traumatic her body is simply shutting down." Sona paused. "While it would be wasteful, I understand that you have certain feelings regarding our resurrection of humans into devils. Given your arrangement with Rios and the fact that you saved both our peerages today, I am willing to let go of my claim to her and allow you to do with her as you will." Rios nodded sadly. "If that is what you wish Sasuke-san, we will allow her to die naturally. I would suggest you speak with her about it though if you can. From what little data we received about her, there was some conjecture that she may have been excommunicated from her church before this incident occurred. If that is true, she may welcome being resurrected as a devil as opposed to the alternative." Sasuke furrowed his brow. "Why would that matter?" A look of distaste appeared on Rio's face. "Excommunication from the church is a cruel punishment for those followers that get out of line. Essentially it is the power to deny them entrance to heaven. Rumor has it she was given this punishment for using her powers to heal a devil. Based on that alone, I convinced Sona to join with me and came to rescue her. I can always use a good combination of power and character, especially since someone keeps robbing me of my potential recruits." Rios finished teasingly, trying to inject a bit of levity into the grim situation. Sasuke grunted. "I won't apologize for saving humans from you two, even if from what I've seen you treat contracted humans better than most of your kind would." Rios sighed in resignation and walked towards a nearby magic portal, Sona trailing in her wake. "If you change your mind Sasuke, let us know. Either one of us would gladly have her in our peerage." Rios said over her shoulder right before the portal carried her off. "I trust you will clean up the remainder of this mess as we attend to our peerages. Your service in saving my peerage today will not soon be forgotten, Sasuke-san," Sona said with a brief bow of her head before also being teleported away. Taking a minute to clean his sword, Sasuke walked over to the blonde and softly lifted her to a seated position. She was fading fast, it was likely that she only had an hour of life left to her. He frowned in the direction of Don Azik as he noticed the fallen angel trying to quietly crawl away on two broken legs. Normally, he would have liked to interrogate the leader for information, it was why he left him alive in the first place. Sometimes though, plans change. Just as with the mafia leaders, Sasuke had no qualms about ending someone that would torture an innocent civilian purely for personal gain. Sasuke gently laid Asia back down as he unsheathed his katana, the smooth whisper of noise sounding like a bell of doom tolling to the suddenly panicked Don Azik. Even as Sasuke approached briskly, Don Azik coughed up blood and spat at his approaching executioner. "You're nothing human. Kakabi-sama will chew you up and spit out your bone, Shank." The katana made a whisper of sound as Danazeke's head flew in the opposite direction of his body. Well, a single name was better than nothing considering how things had turned out. Sasuke was certainly glad that the only thing bigger than the egos on these fallen angels was their mouths. Piling the remaining bodies together with the ashes of the 3 fallen angels, Sasuke made a few brief calls. The disposal service was called to take care of the fallen angel remains and to collect the remains of the 2 presumably deceased Yakuza teams, assuming the remains could still be recovered after the battle had demolished most of the abandoned church. The second call he made was to the Yakuza leader who had initially informed him of the missing teams at the church. Sasuke tersely filled him in on the status of his men and instructed him to have the authorities cover the whole incident up as a gas explosion. He doubted many people would care in the first place. The ruined church had obviously been abandoned to the elements for some time. Burning the disposable phone to ash, Sasuke picked up Asia gently and used an overpowered shunshin to travel to his apartment with all possible speed. He wanted a safe place for what he had planned. As he arrived at his apartment, Sasuke gently placed the body of Asia on the couch even as she softly breathed her last. Speeding up his pace, Sasuke brought all his automated defenses online around the building. He had bought the entire swanky building his penthouse resided on some time ago to allow for increased security measures. His first act as landlord had been to evict all the current residents for their own future safety. He was currently looking into knocking down the walls and repurposing the entire space, for now though it would suit his purposes. Taking a deep breath, Sasuke took a few moments to center himself and bring his chakra to maximum efficiency. What he was attempting was absurdly dangerous, but he believed the potential benefits justified the risk. Outer Path, Samsara of Heavenly Life Technique. A grotesque figure arose from the center of the large room. The supposed king of hell opened his mouth to release a single green soul that flew back to Asia's body. Even as Asia stirred to wakefulness and the grotesque figure disappeared, Sasuke used a chakra transfer technique he learned from Sakura's exhaustive medical knowledge to restore Asia's energy levels and stamina. Oh! It must have all been a terrible nightmare. Thump! Sasuke fell to the ground as he felt the last of his strength begin to fail him. One of the unfortunate effects of the Samsara of Heavenly Life technique was that it took the life of the caster in exchange for the power over life and death. Asia looked at Sasuke in shock before rushing over to heal him. It wasn't just a dream. Hold on, Angel-sama, I will save you. Green light flooded Sasuke's body even as he pondered what might have been his last roll of the dice. Moments such as Asia dying were rare opportunities that never came back once they were gone. It was learning to recognize these turning points of fate that separated the great shinobi from all the rest. If what he believed about her was true, the risk of his own life would be a small price to pay. In his previous life, he had never used this technique because there was no way to circumvent the cost. Here though, these sacred gears transcended chakra and infringed on divinity in some cases, leading to Sasuke's belief that with twilight healing in his corner, he could surpass his previous limitations. If he survived this initial hurdle that was. As the green light coming from Asia battled the inexorable force attempting to harvest his life, Sasuke could only writhe in agony and endure as his life hung by a single thread. It was a close thing, but Sasuke survived thanks to Asia's tireless healing. In all his years of battle, he had never felt pain such as he did when Asia fought for his life against the entity that sought to collect it. It was akin to his soul being used as a rope for a tug of war between two titans. Finally, the green light from Asia had severed the connection between what Sasuke assumed was the link between himself and the King of Hell. Even as he lay there on the couch, Asia collapsed on top of him, completely spent. She had moved him to the couch and placed one hand over his heart and one over his head when she started, healing the most vulnerable areas first before moving to sever the link directly. With an unconscious Asia draped over his torso, Sasuke began to make plans. He could do nothing else in the meantime since his body had no strength, and he needed time anyways to consider how best to utilize Asia in his growing group of misfits. As the hours passed and the adrenaline began to fade, Sasuke allowed himself to doze and recover some of his strength. Some hours later, the door opened and awoke Sasuke from his light slumber. There was only one other person who was allowed access to Sasuke's fortress, so he already knew who it was. "Sensei, where have you been? I've been looking all of." Issei stopped and goggled at Sasuke's and Asia's positioning before immediately assuming all the wrong things. His knees hit the floor even as his hands were raised in supplication. "Most worthy sensei, please teach me your ways. Show this unworthy peasant how to bring a young beauty to exhaustion after a night full of." A shoe sailed like a missile and sent Issei crashing back into the kitchen, waking up Asia in the process. "Angel-sama. Are you feeling better? I am still exhausted from last night, but I will do my best if you need me." A nosebleed erupted from the kitchen floor. Sasuke rolled his eyes at the drama. "Teenagers, honestly. Oh no. Hold on." Asia made to rise and assist Issei, only to be stopped by Sasuke's firm hand. "Leave him be, he'll be fine once the blood goes back to what passes for his brain." Asia looked confused. A creepy chuckle came from the kitchen. "Sensei wants her all to hims." Bonk. The other shoe ricocheted off the ceiling to hit Issei in a much more sensitive area. Suddenly Issei was much more focused on curling up in a ball than making comments about his sensei's behavior. "If you're done blabbering, I want you in here ready to listen." Issei sulkily uncurled from his position on the kitchen floor and assumed a seiza position next to Asia. "Good. Now, Asia-chan, could you tell me a bit about yourself?" "Of course, Angel-sama. I was raised in the church to be a nun for many years. It was found out early on that I had the sacred gift of healing and I would often heal people the priests brought to me." Asia paused to collect her thoughts before continuing. "It was a nice life on the whole. Most of my time was spent in prayer or healing the sick and injured. My only regret has been that I have not been able to interact with people my own age outside those that come in for healing. Most of the brothers and sisters were either very young or very old, so I have little experience talking with those my age. My life has pretty much stayed the same as I just described to you until a few months ago, when I was excommunicated from the church." A single tear rolled down Asia's face as Sasuke frowned. "Why did the church exile you?" "I healed a devil, something that is considered to be a high sin against God since they are one of his sworn enemies. After being excommunicated and thrown out of the church I had grown up in my whole life, I had nowhere to go. As I wandered around with no direction for a few days, a beautiful woman showed up and offered to restore my standing in the church." "This woman, did she have raven black hair and indigo colored eyes?" "Yes. Have you met Yama-sen?" A grim chuckle escaped Sasuke. "You could say that we've met before, please continue." "Yama-san told me that if I went through a painful ritual and proved my faith, she would personally see to it that I was restored to the church. She gave me a plane ticket to Tokyo and the bus pass to Kuo town, then told me that she would meet me at the only church in town. As soon as I arrived in town there was some kind of battle in the alley by the bus stop. I stopped to heal one of the injured before continuing on to the church. Normally I would have stayed to help, but it looked very dangerous and I had to get to the church soon. Yama-san warned me that the offer would quickly expire since there were so many people wanting to get their status restored. Once I got there, they immediately set me up on the cross and began the ritual. It was only when they started drinking my blood that I began to question the legitimacy of their claims to restore my status in the church." Asia stared off into space, obviously reliving the moment of torture in her mind. Sasuke decided to dislodge her from the dark thoughts likely replaying in her head. "What are your plans now, Asia-chan?" Asia smiled brightly. "To serve you, of course, Angel-sama." Sasuke stilled. He had assumed the title to be an after effect of battle fatigue or some strange nickname. It would appear that she actually thought him to be some sort of divine figure. "Why is it you call me Angel-sama?" "I prayed the entire time I was undergoing the ritual, harder than I ever have. I prayed for someone to come save me, and to give me a new purpose in life. For a strong protector to take care of me now that the church has thrown me out. Then you appeared like the angel of death himself, saving me from all my enemies. If that wasn't proof enough, after the battle you even brought me back to life." Issei looked on with wide eyes as Asia approached Sasuke with intent eyes and kneeled before him, assuming a full supplication pose. "My life is yours to do with as you will, Angel-sama." Sasuke thought her attitude was a bit extreme. The loyalty she showed was not in question though. He could tell that she would truly serve him until the day she died if he allowed her to devote herself to him. The same faith that allowed her to believe in a god she had never met would be even stronger towards a manifestation she could interact with. Sasuke knew that most people would immediately raise her up and chastise her for her behavior, right before sending her on her way. People were uncomfortable with veneration because it made them feel they were being held to an impossible standard. To Sasuke though, he felt that her devotion would be no different than a truly dedicated ninja felt towards their Hokage, if a bit more so than was expected. Still though, she would know the truth before serving him if that is what she truly wanted. Looking at Issei to see why he had been silent thus far, he saw that his gaze had been arrested by the pendulous swell of Asia's significant assets for the last few minutes. They were quite impressive, but Sasuke had no time for simple-minded fools. The boy would get a double training session later while yelling the whole time, "Look but don't stare." Shaking his head at Issei's antics, Sasuke responded to Asia. "I am not a divine messenger, Asia, I am completely human. Granted, I am significantly more powerful than most humans, but I am not associated with any religion at all. Knowing that, would you still seek to serve me?" Asia raised her head to nod frantically. "If you are completely human, then you must be a saint. Saints are born with great powers and use them to save others. Usually they do so in the name of God, but I'm fine with you doing so for your own reasons. Good deeds are worthy in themselves, so yes, I would still like to serve you, Saint-sama." Sasuke chuckled to himself. It seemed that she needed to place him on some sort of platform to fit with her ideology. So long as she was loyal, he didn't particularly care what she called him or how much she felt the need to put him on a pedestal. "Very well, I accept your pledge of service. In return for your obedience to me as your leader, you will receive both my protection and a monthly stipend to do with what you will." That snapped Issei out of his staring stupor. "Oi? Why don't I get a monthly stipend?" Sasuke glanced at him in distaste. "Mostly because you are not actually doing anything for me. Our agreement was for your protection and nothing else. To that end I have sacrificed both time and resources to raise your survival level. In return I have gained nothing. Through Asia I will have a loyal follower and one that will gain worth as she trains to become more useful. Besides that, she will provide an invaluable service to me." Issei got a leering grin on his face. "I would say to get your mind out of the gutter, but I am fairly certain it resides there permanently. She will serve as my stand-in girlfriend if she is willing, but in name only." Looking at Asia's red face and Issei's worshipful one, he assumed all they heard was girlfriend. "SS Saint SS-sama, this is so sudden." Asia stuttered out with a bright red face. "Please sensei, teach me your ways that I may also command gorgeous women to my bidding." Sighing deeply, Sasuke resigned himself to what turned out to be a rather lengthy explanation. By the end of it, both Issei and Asia seemed disappointed. Issei because Sasuke had refused to spill his secrets, and Asia he could only assume because it was a relationship in name only. After making sure they understood his point, he also took the time to review his various aliases with them as well as the general plan for the next few months. At school, he was Sasuke-kun. Around the Yakuza he was Kakashi-sensei, or just sensei. In private he was sensei to Issei and Saint-sama, she had insisted, to Asia. Issei's training with Sasuke would be much the same in content, though Sasuke planned to push the intensity through the roof. Issei had been improving gradually. He was now roughly on par with a very gifted athlete that could not utilize chakra. That would be excellent for fighting Yakuza thugs but useless against any supernatural being, which was the end goal of the training. Sasuke planned to push Issei into the ground now that he had Asia on board as a capable healer to keep any permanent damage from occurring. He was still impatient to get Issei to the limits of human exertion to see if his tenant would help him push past those limits. That was the only way he could currently see Issei having a small chance at surviving another supernatural encounter. Only time would tell if Issei was ever able to overcome his current limitations. As for Asia, Sasuke planned for her to fulfill many roles in his fledgling group. During the day, she would accompany he and Issei to school and stand in as Sasuke's girlfriend. While Issei was tutored and wandered the streets with the Yakuza after school, Asia would work at a private clinic Sasuke would soon build to heal crippling diseases. This would allow for yet another generous stream of revenue. You could never have too much money, and give Asia a chance to use her powers regularly. The clinic would be very quietly known in certain elite circles and incredibly expensive, thus allowing only the most elite to empty out their pockets on the treatment. As a middle ground, Sasuke would accompany Asia once a week to the local hospitals and allow free healing to the most deserving. After all, a good leader realizes the heart of the people underneath them and works to make them thrive. He knew having Asia only provide her skills to the rich would bother her in the long run if she wasn't able to do some good works on the side. At the end of the day, Asia would join Sasuke and Issei for their training session and heal Issei as needed. Sasuke also planned to get her started on an accelerated exercise program as well, once he was able to judge the extent of her healing powers. As far as living situations were concerned, Issei would continue to live with his parents for the time being. If he and Sasuke eventually reached a mutual agreement where they both had something to gain and Sasuke was convinced of his loyalty, he would offer him a penthouse on his secure property. Asia was given an identical loft to Sasuke's right next door. He would soon have a door installed through the reinforced wall to allow access to both rooms in the case of an emergency. With all the details hammered out for now, Sasuke shooed Issei out of his apartment and told him to meet them at the usual time outside school. Issei shot Sasuke a knowing look as he glanced at him, then at Asia before smirking. The door was promptly shut in Issei's face. Sasuke made some brief small talk with Asia about her life in the church and what things she liked to do in her spare time before turning in on the couch. He allowed Asia to take over his room for now, just until the other apartment was fully furnished. Sasuke sighed as he allowed sleep to overtake him. Tomorrow promised to be an interesting day. The following morning, Sasuke and Asia met Issei at the school gate before heading towards Sona's office. After a brief meeting with her, Sona allowed Asia to attend the school on a probationary basis. In other words, so long as she didn't tank the grades of her class, she was welcome to stay. Sasuke was not surprised. Sona was likely glad to be able to lessen some of the large debt she owed him, though she couldn't be obvious about her favoritism if Asia turned out to be a terrible student. Sasuke wasn't worried on that front. Apparently Asia was tutored regularly at her church by the nuns when she wasn't attending mass or healing. He had no doubt she would be able to keep up with little effort. As all three approached homeroom, Sasuke coached Asia on her introduction and how she would announce her status as his girlfriend. Months had been spent on this plan, though Asia's involvement was a recent addition, and he couldn't afford to fail now. His future school life depended on it. As all the students settled in and the teacher inevitably called up Asia for her introduction, the whispers began from both genders. "She's so gorgeous. Those eyes and that hair, she must be from Europe. Damn. More competition for Sasuke-sama and Kiba-sama, we won't go down without a fight. Would you look at the size of her?" The last comment was from one of Issei's former friends that was currently fiddling with a no-flash zoomable camera. "Good morning. My name is Asia Argento, please take care of me." Asia finished with an amiibo to the class. As the teacher gestured to a seat near the front, Asia instead pointed to a seat beside Sasuke currently taken up by one of the few boys in the class. "Excuse me, do you mind if we trade seats so I could sit beside my boyfriend?" As the boy in question traded seats, all eyes swiveled to Sasuke. He made a single nod. Instantly, pandemonium was set off. "What? That slut can't have him. Sasuke-sama, how could you?" "No. Not another beauty lost to one of the pretty boys." Why? 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 The teacher tried to restore order but eventually just shrugged and took out an adventure novel. He was on the clock anyways and figured they would run out of steam eventually. The rest of the day the school was on fire with rumors and talk, all centered around the new transfer student that also happened to be Sasuke's girlfriend. Sasuke smiled contentedly as he allowed Asia to hold his arm at lunch, oblivious to the cacophony of hisses the action created amongst his crowd of former fangirls. Normally, Sasuke did not like being touched and wouldn't be caught dead with one of his fangirls holding him, but this was a calculated move. If he could deal with some basic performances of affection with a loyal subordinate, it would drive off all the fangirls except for the very few obsessed fans that would never take a hint anyways. It was bad now, but he knew these early battles would win the war for freedom. Once it was obvious he was taken, most of his current fans would flock back to their original idol and leave him alone. As if by magic, Kiba sneezed and met eyes with Sasuke across the schoolyard, a look of slight reproach in his eyes. Bowing his head wordlessly, Sasuke accepted the silent rebuke and carried on. It was terrible to do this to a brother in arms, but sacrifices had to be made for the greater good at times. The meeting after school at the occult headquarters began as a rather tense affair. Both Sona and Rios were obviously very interested in how Sasuke was able to either magically heal a nearly deceased Asia or have her resurrected. Sasuke point-blank refused their inquiries and insisted with moving on to business as usual, causing a bit of an awkward situation as neither side wanted to capitulate. Sasuke-san, don't you realize that whatever you used to save Asia could save many other innocents? There are so many people that summon us on their deathbed that could be saved using such a method. Rios argued passionately. Sasuke inclined his head to her, it was a fair point. Be that as it may, I will say nothing further on the subject save this. The method I use to save Asia is so dangerous and cost prohibitive that I don't foresee using it again. I'm sure there are similarly pyrrhic powers in the underworld. Rios and Sona reluctantly nodded. There were indeed a few devil families that had unimaginably powerful gifts that came at such a high cost they were rarely, if ever, used. The Phoenix family for example occasionally had a member born that could resurrect another person, though the cost was inevitably the caster's life. Granted, it had been several thousand years since that particular gift had manifested. When last we met Sona, you mentioned that you would not forget my saving of your peerage. Would it be too soon to call upon that gratitude? Sona looked surprised but nodded while adjusting her glasses. Certainly not, Sasuke-san, though I should caution you that it is usually wise to hoard your favors for a rainy day and not spend them so frivolously. Sona replied, pointedly looking at the artifact on Sasuke's person that represented her still unused favor with him. Noted. In exchange for saving your peerage, I ask that you personally train Asia in healing magic and any other magic she is able to learn. I will certainly do my best, Sasuke-san, but you should realize that this is a rather poor way to use your favor. I am only skilled in basic healing magic, and my spell repertoire is limited to magic of the demonic origin that you would be unable to use as a human. True, but I trust that you are intelligent and dedicated enough to find resources that will allow you to fill in your knowledge gaps. I have no doubt that you will serve as an able teacher despite your lack of knowledge on the subject so far. Sona bowed her head to Sasuke, a very slight blush on her cheeks as she acknowledged his praise. Of course, Sasuke-san, if you are sure that this is the manner in which you would like to spend your favor, I will do everything in my power to be a good teacher for Asia-chan. I will reach out to some of my more reliable underworld contacts and see if they can acquire magical texts from the few human mages that exist today. Sasuke nodded seriously. Excellent, Asia will work with you after school until the clinic is built and she can do some hands-on training. At that point you can accompany her to the clinic after school and oversee her healer training, along with any other spells she is able to learn in the meantime. Sona inclined her head in agreement. Rios, what is the situation with Riser looking like? In the last meeting you mentioned he was becoming increasingly aggressive towards you. Rios was about to speak when a crest appeared on the floor and her eyes widened. Sona's eyebrows raised. the house crest of Phoenix. It appears that you may soon direct your questions directly to the source, Sasuke-san. A flash overtook the room as a handsome young man appeared, surrounded by scantily clad women. Issei looked positively green with envy as one of the more voluptuous members draped herself over the man, who swatted her away in annoyance. Signaling for his peerage to stay put, the man, Riser, Sasuke assumed, spread his arms wide and walked to Rios in order to embrace her. It was obvious from the way her entire peerage tensed that they were not happy with the situation, even as they looked on in helpless rage. Sasuke surmised that they were under orders from Rios herself to not make a scene with Riser unless absolutely necessary. Rios had a face like stone as Riser embraced her rather lewdly, crushing her chest to his even as his hands sought a hold on her ample backside. The pressure in the room rose as both Rios and Sona's peerage looked on in fury at Riser's brazen behavior. Riser nonchalantly grinned and removed one of hands to wave cheekily at the infuriated audience before releasing Rios. "So good to see my beloved fiancé. I can hardly wait for you to drop this foolish resistance and submit to me as a good wife should." Rios gritted her teeth audibly before replying. "Riser, a pleasure as always. I do hope you are leaving soon." Riser flashed her a winning grin as he surveyed the gathered peerages, stopping on Sasuke. "A ragtag group of devils and a few weakling humans. What strange company you keep, Rios. You'll have nothing to do with such rabble once you belong to me." Sasuke flashed an amused grin at the cocky devil. This brat was obviously used to people pandering to him, though obviously he still hadn't realized that almost all of them did so because of his family name and for no other reason. Riser's smile withered as he saw the mocking grin on Sasuke's face. "I don't like the look on your face, human. Is it right for the insect to disdain the nearby shoe that could crush it in the blink of an eye?" Sasuke's grin took a sharper edge as he released some killing intent at the upstart. Riser turned pale as he focused on the human. There was obviously more to this one than immediately met the eye, since he was not cowering in fear after receiving a blatant threat. Even as Riser began the process of gathering his power, Sona quickly diffused the situation. "Why are you here, Riser-kun? Surely not to waste your time threatening some lowly human, that would be beneath your family name." Riser whirled around to sneer at Sona. "So, the bookworm finally speaks. Don't think that you can get away with whatever you want just because your sister is one of the great four. My family is just as powerful as your own." "Then perhaps you could answer the question that everyone has already asked of you, why are you here? I will remind you that my school is open to only those that I approve of and falls under part of the Grimmery/Cittery Protectorate. As such I would suggest you tread carefully." Riser smirked. "You're not the only one to read up on obscure laws, Sona. As the fiancé of the Grimmery House I essentially have carte blanche to do as I like in their territories unless the arrangement is terminated. That's certainly never going to happen, so I would suggest you watch your tongue." Sona looked surprised. She obviously hadn't expected Riser to have ever cracked a book, much less one of the more obscure and wordy books on demon law. Even as Sona lost steam in her argument, Issei was quick to pipe up from the back of the room. Usually he kept quiet in these meetings as he was still nervous around the beings that had essentially tried to steal his soul, but his loudmouth nature couldn't be denied for long. "Oi, you harem wannabe. Nobody wants you here, so why don't you shove off?" "What's this? Rios, why you surround yourself with powerless idiots is a mystery to me. Both of you know the laws though. Any human that offends a demon noble will immediately lose their life in penance." First there was the human over in the corner with his offensive smirking. Luckily for him I don't care enough to deal with his impudence. This human weakling actually had the temerity to order me to leave though. I demand satisfaction. Sona and Rios both looked on with horrified expressions. If Issei was one of theirs, they could protect him as part of their peerage. As an unaffiliated human though, they could not legally protest Riser's claim to satisfaction. Rios might have been able to placate Riser with promises to capitulate to his whims, but she was reluctant to potentially throw away her freedom for a human she barely knew. Surveying the silent room with satisfaction, Riser met the eyes of his queen and nodded once. There was a blur as she appeared behind Issei and stabbed towards his heart. Months of reflex training allowed Issei to dodge, the blade missing his heart and piercing one of his lungs instead. Asia cried out in shock and immediately started healing Issei even as the furious queen prepared to take his head. Suddenly the room seemed to darken and flicker as an enormous wave of killing intent rolled over all the assembled peerages. The three kings were barely able to keep their feet, Riss and Sona mainly because the intent was not directed at them. Riser's eyes bulged as he painfully moved his head to where he could see the dark human figure exuding such a murderous aura. Riser's queen was the most battle-hardened veteran on his squad, having carried the team through the fighting portions of the raiding games thus far. She was also in love with Riser. As she sensed death swiftly approaching him, she was able to use a combination of her battle experience and sheer desperation to overcome the heavy killing intent enough to move freely. Moving swiftly, she moved to attack the supposed human that approached her master like the Reaper himself. Stop! Everyone froze in surprise as the most unexpected figure commanded the queen to cease her movements. Riser had beads of sweat pouring down his face as he fought the killing intent of this monstrous thing in human form. As a demon noble, he had been around power often enough to know when he was outmatched. If he thought the human was actually going to attack him, he would have gladly used his entire peerage as a shield while escaping. The fact that such a powerful figure had not immediately killed him suggested he wanted a negotiation of sorts. I see you are not completely stupid, Riser. If you had not stopped your queen, she would be dead right now. Riser gulped. You don't seem like the brave type, so I suppose you already realize that I'm not going to require your life just yet. However, Sasuke used an overpowered shunshin to immediately teleport to Riser and grab him firmly by the throat. Don't think your vaunted healing powers will do you any good if I decide to blast you into tiny pieces and feed you to the dogs. Sasuke softly whispered in Riser's ear. Riser whimpered. He was used to mock battles where there was little real danger and he was able to lord his superiority over others in the arena. This was real battle, against an opponent he believed would actually squash him like a bug if he moved the wrong way. I am glad you realize the gravity of the situation, so I will be brief. I'm sure that once you're surrounded by your cronies again you will forget this moment of weakness, so I won't bother ordering you to not marry Rias. I doubt you have any say in the matter anyways, as this was obviously orchestrated by both of your families. What you will do is accept the raiding game with Rias, and you will lose on purpose. We both know a man like you just sees Rias as a shiny toy to be played with and discarded, so she is no great loss to you. Riser grunted sourly and nodded in assent. Just in case you decide to renege on the deal or have the balls to sick your family on me, I want you to remember this exact moment. Remember how I could squash you like an ant along with your peerage in an instant. Ponder this moment of terror every time you even think of betraying me. Sasuke ground out even as he reinforced the suggestion with his dojutsu. Shoving Riser towards the magic circle, Sasuke gave him a parting shot. Be glad that I'm leaving you alive after you attacked one of the people under my protection. If you attack them again it will be the last thing you ever do. Gathering up the shreds of his dignity, Riser shot him a look of pure hate as he ground his teeth and nodded back in response. In a flash of light Riser disappeared, his peerage following him in a state of shock. Sasuke immediately turned to Asia in a wordless question. He will be fine, Saint-sama. His lung and kidney were ruptured but I have already stabilized him and he should be healed within the next few minutes. Excellent, Asia-chan, thank you for your support. Asia gave him a big smile at the acknowledgement before going back to her work. Surveying the rest of the room, the responses were mixed. Most of Sona's peerage were standing with their mouths collectively on the floor, obviously never imagining a human being able to overpower a young devil lord so thoroughly and with so little effort. Half of them had been unconscious during the battle with the fallen angels by the time Sasuke had appeared, so they were unaware of his unusual combat abilities. Sona herself looked suitably impressed, even after witnessing his destruction of the fallen angels at the last battle. Rias and her peerage looked gratified if slightly nervous at his blatant display of power. Well, except for Akano. Akano was flushed and panting heavily as she stared at Sasuke, almost like a dog in heat. Ah, that did explain a few things about her personality. Obviously, his display of dominance over Riser was a bit much for her unprepared senses to handle discreetly. Well, Sasuke-san, your courage is certainly not in question. You just made the blood enemy of one of the most powerful houses in the underworld. Sona commented succinctly. Sasuke waved her off. I would have preferred to save direct confrontation with the underworld until later down the road, but it was inevitable at some stage. I believe Rias is now in a better place regarding her issue, unless you disagree? Rias shook her head. That whole display just served to piss Riser the hell off. He will accept the rating game, just as he'll likely now cheat and do everything in his power to beat my whole peerage to a bloody pulp for seeing his humiliation today. It's the kind of man he is. I'll take your word on that, as I'm sure you know him better than I do. He seemed more like a coward than anything, but if he does overpower the compulsion placed on him, you will need to be ready to fight. Just going by what I have observed thus far, your current half-filled peerage would be no match for his right now. Rios nodded forlornly. I prefer to recruit humans for my peerage, but I will see if brother can find me a powerful addition in time to solidify my victory. Sasuke turned to her slowly. If your brother is the leader of the underworld, why not have him grant you extremely powerful devils to join your peerage? Surely there are many that would jump at the chance for the prestige if nothing else. Rias shook her head angrily. No. I have always wanted to do everything on my own as much as possible. Plus, I want a peerage that will be like family to me, not a band of mercenaries that joins me out of their own lust for power and prestige. Sasuke eyed her pensively. I understand the need to prove yourself, but I would caution you against letting pride be your downfall. If you lose this battle and become Riser's plaything, you will dearly wish you had recruited that band of mercenaries. I will think on what you have said, Sasuke-san. Seeing that Issei was healed up if still weakened, Sasuke slung him over his shoulder and inclined his head to the devils as he took his leave. Asia following him close behind, meekly closing the door on the quiet clubhouse. Kiba shook his head in the silence that followed Sasuke's departure. Well, at least nobody ever said life with Sasuke-san around was boring. A thunderous crash shook the entire clearing, causing all manner of wildlife to scramble for cover. Susanoo. A towering demonic figure emerged in the clearing, holographic flesh covering the bare skeleton even as the menacing figure fully formed. The small figure of Sasuke nestled deep inside the construct let out a savage grin. Amaterasu. A flaming sword of darkness emerged and moved to salute the gaping audience, consisting of Asia and Issei, before the massive demonic figure went through some basic sword katas. It felt good to get his full power back, Sasuke mused to himself. As he suspected, Asia's twilight healing powers were far more potent than anyone had predicted. If the other factions knew of its true utility, she would be hunted relentlessly. Thus, his miraculous discovery would stay a well-kept secret among their tight-knit group that currently consisted of only himself, Asia and Issei. After only a few sessions with Sona, Asia had gained a control and confidence with her power she had not possessed previously. In lieu of her rapid improvement, Sasuke had cashed in on the theory that he had risked his life for. Essentially, Sasuke asked Asia to heal his ability to use chakra. Ever since his arrival on this world, Sasuke's chakra had been a constant source of irritation to him. He was very fortunate thus far to only fight what he now recognized as small fry in the grand scheme of things, but he knew that could change at any time. If he had been ambushed by one of the faction leaders while he was unable to utilize his full strength, his survival would have been in question. Now though, he was able to utilize his chakra as he normally would have been able to at the end of the war. No delays were necessary and his young body practically hummed with energy just asking to be used, thus Sasuke's showy display for his subordinates. The fact that Asia's power was able to restore more than just grievous wounds and could instead mold itself to accomplish her desires was huge. One of the largest advantages other races had over humanity was their longevity. Even the most powerful, accomplished human had to bend their knee to time and eventually death within a mere century. Typically, a devil or fallen angel was just clearing their period of adolescence by that milestone. Even though he had yet to test it, Sasuke theorized that Asia would eventually be able to heal the body cells to the point that it essentially stopped or even reversed human aging. Thus, the power to potentially alter much of the current power dynamic lay within Asia's hands. All the non-human factions would seek her destruction for what she could do, namely make the human faction a force to be reckoned with instead of everyone's whipping boy. If there were any powerful human groups out there, Sasuke had no doubt they would seize her immediately and force her to make their group the strongest humans in the world. With all this in mind, Sasuke had explained the situation to both Asia and Issei after he had been healed. Asia he had to be a bit firmer with than usual since her first instinct was to use her new powers to alleviate suffering. Sasuke had explained that her desire to help others was commendable, but would cause more chaos and death in the long run when the discovery of her abilities likely led to a small war between the factions. Issei seemed to get the dynamic a bit quicker than Asia and hastily agreed to keep his mouth shut. Sasuke had reinforced this with the evil eye before nodding and assuring him he would die horribly if he ever traded that information for certain favors. Asia had turned red and chittered even as Issei adopted an incensed attitude that lasted for hours. In the end, Sasuke felt that they would both keep Asia's secret, if for different reasons altogether. Sasuke refocused and dismissed his Susanoo, gesturing for Asia and Issei to join him. As Issei walked up, Sasuke casually tossed him a bokken and took a stance. "Attack me." Issei shifted his stance to grab the sword and immediately swung at Sasuke's head. Thwack! The two bokken connected with a satisfying sound before the combatants immediately began the dance of swordplay. Issei had improved over the last few months to where he could hold out for 10 or so strikes, assuming Sasuke did not use chakra-empowered blows. Some days empowered blows were all Sasuke would use, both to get Issei used to what he would be facing on the supernatural battlefield and to see if he could push Thrige into doing something. So far, there was no progress on that front. The dragon remained silent and Issei could only get blown across the clearing as the monstrously powerful blows overpowered his defenses. Sasuke was used to training young ninja that employed chakra, so he was unsure of how typical Issei's progress was for a standard human. If he had to guess though, he would say much higher than usual. The fact that Issei was able to get so far in training without Asia there to heal him spoke to an unusually resilient body. Likely the energy from his tenant assisted him in healing, much as the Kyuubi had unwillingly assisted Naruto all those years. Sasuke was an accomplished swordsman in his previous life and had lost none of his hard-earned skill when coming to this world. The fact that Issei could fend him off for even a few seconds this early in training showed promise. However, unless Issei was able to get a breakthrough with his tenant or they found another source of power he could use, he was essentially useless in most fights. The simple fact was that humans were incredibly weak compared to most of the other races. Both devils and fallen angels would be able to destroy Issei in a heartbeat through sheer speed and power. It was more likely though that they would capture him to either extract his tenant or enslave him to their whims. Issei hissed as Sasuke slipped past his guard and broke his collarbone. Another part of Issei's training was pain tolerance. Ever since Asia's arrival Sasuke had regularly broken bones so that Issei could get used to the feeling and still fight if necessary. Whereas initially Issei would have screamed and fallen to the ground clutching the broken area, he now only hissed deeply and repositioned the bokken to his other arm and assumed his stance. Sasuke could definitely see improvement. Still though, with a lightning-quick disarm, Sasuke beat the bokken out of Issei's loose grip and clubbed Issei unconscious. He was careful though not to use too much force. It was a simple matter to rupture Issei's eggshell-thin skull with the amount of power he was using, even with a bokken. Asia rushed over and began healing Issei with a worried expression. Much as she now saw this training as necessary, it still bothered her to see Sasuke brutally beat Issei every day. Hearing a very slight noise, Sasuke instantly drew his true katana and assumed a ready stance even as he heard a small group steadily approaching from the east. Sasuke relaxed as he spotted Rias and her peerage approaching slowly with their hands in plain view. Obviously, they did not want Sasuke to get the wrong idea and had made pains to approach in a non-threatening manner. Rias, what can I help you with today? As you can see, we are in the middle of training. That's actually what I wanted to see you about, Sasuke-san. I was wondering if it would be possible to hire your services in training my peerage for the upcoming raiding game. Sasuke looked at the assembled peerage. Akino eyed him hungrily as she gave him a big smile. Kiba looked a bit disappointed in him. Sasuke could only assume it was due to the success of the girlfriend plot that had caused most of his fangirls to rejoin the Kiba squad. He really would have to make it up to him sometime. Koneko had a bored expression in place, though Sasuke could tell she was nervous by the way her muscles were fully tensed. Our last member is a bit of a shut-in and will not be joining us, either for the training or the raiding game. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. So, you have a few half-trained peerage members, one of which is not even participating, and you are trying to beat a full team of veteran rankers? Rias seemed to wilt a bit under the facts. That's why it's so important that you train us. I'm certain that with your help we could get to the level necessary to beat them, especially if Riser actually rolls over like he's supposed to. Sasuke shook his head. You were the one that said he would likely still try to win, don't contradict yourself now. Besides, it is a much better idea to assume that he's going to come out ready to fight and be wrong than half prepare and get beaten to a pulp. Rio gulped at that. How much time until the match? Riser has not officially agreed to anything yet, but 2 months is likely. Sasuke grunted. 8 weeks is not much time. I might be able to get your ragtag group ready to fight his squad in that time, but I would be a great deal more confident if you had at least one veteran fighter to train the team around. Any success asking your brother for a team member? Sasuke gave her a flat stare as Rios shifted guiltily. It hasn't come up just yet. Are you sure that you don't want to become Riser's plaything? Because if you are right and he does show up to fight, you will definitely lose whether I train you or not at this stage. Sasuke held up a hand for silence as Rios was about to retort. I realize that you don't like sacrificing one of your peerage slots for this, but I would highly suggest that you reconsider and do everything in your power to win this game. You have been half-assing it so far by not even asking your brother for a valuable resource he would obviously gladly provide. I don't think you're ready for my training if you can't even do that much. Rios reluctantly nodded in assent. Good. I would suggest meeting with your brother as soon as possible to get your new peerage member. Once they are on board, we can talk terms for training. Terms? What I will expect from all of you in the training sessions, along with my price for gifting you with this knowledge. I will plan to hear from you within the week or we will call the whole thing off. Sasuke raised a hand to silence her protest. If it's such a low priority for you that you can't get back to me within that time period, then training you is not worth my time. Rios bowed her head. Very well, Sasuke-san, I will speak to Nisan immediately and contact you when we are ready. Akino created a portal that quickly vanished all of the Grimoire peerage, leaving Sasuke alone with his charges. Issei was sitting up watching the entire exchange with a surprising amount of focus. Maybe he should break his collarbone more often, for training purposes of course. Sasuke gestured at Issei to pick up his bokken as he assumed his ready stance. Issei had a long way to go and they might as well keep at it until the sun went down. It was not until the end of the week that Sasuke heard from Rias. As it so happened, he was currently in the middle of a patrol with some of the Yakuza toughs he had been grooming as potential lieutenants for the area. The men looked at him in question as he waved them away so he could take the call in private. It was not 10 seconds later that he was by himself in the alley with his men keeping watch at the mouth. Professionalism was something these particular men had in abundance, which is why he tolerated their presence. Yes? Sasuke-san? I met with Nisan and have acquired our new peerage member. Oh? And what piece have you given up? Our new member is a rook. I can introduce you to him as soon as we meet in the occult headquarters. Very well, I will see you tomorrow afternoon. Click. Sasuke always made it a point to rudely end phone calls. It discouraged people from ever casually calling him up for any reason. Making a circular motion to his men, they resumed the daily patrol as Sasuke pondered the details of this particular meeting. He was sure it would be quite entertaining. The next day at school was relatively uneventful. Luckily, the daily overt public displays of affection were no longer needed between himself and Asia. On occasion she would shyly take his hand and he would allow it. After all, appearances had to be maintained. Issei would occasionally still go peeping by himself, though he knew not to be too lewd or he would face Sasuke's wrath. Now that Issei was being trained, Sasuke carefully monitored his behavior and made sure that he never gave in to darker temptations that often came with power. Luckily, Sasuke believed Issei was mostly just a toothless pervert like Jiraiya that enjoyed a good peep. Still though, power changed people and Sasuke would not have his training used for truly uncouth practices by his student. Thus, he made sure to put a check on his behavior when Issei got too aggressive in his peeping. Surprisingly, Issei was behaving himself lately, mostly because he was just dozing at his desk and at lunch. The constant training and healing of grievous injuries took a toll on his stamina that caused him to drag around most of the day when he wasn't training. If it helped keep him out of trouble, it was an added bonus in Sasuke's book. After school, Sasuke led the way to the occult research headquarters as Issei drunkenly followed, Asia looking on with concern. Asia had initially been restoring Issei's stamina before Sasuke put a stop to it. Part of training was dealing with the recovery. If Issei got to the point that he was too tired to train, Sasuke would relent. Until then though he would have to learn how to function with fatigue. Truly it was a valuable skill all ninja acquired at a certain stage. You never knew when a mission would require you to stay up all night before potentially battling it out in the morning. As they entered the room, Sasuke immediately spied the new member of the peerage. A tall man with scarlet-colored hair and a muscular build lounged by one of the pillars in the room, eyeing Sasuke with equal interest. Golden eyes met Onyx as the two powerful men stared each other down before exchanging a brief nod of respect. Sasuke-san, allow me to introduce my cousin and the newest member of my peerage, Leone Gremory. A pleasure to meet you Sasuke-san. As the newest member of her peerage, Ryos-sama has filled me in on your history to date, including your current contract with her. Sasuke shook hands with the young man he assumed to be roughly the same age. A pleasure Leone, I'm sure we'll get along just fine. From his lithe athletic build to the way he watched the room, Sasuke could tell Leone was on the warrior's path and had likely been trained since childhood. This man was exactly what Ryos needed if she wanted any chance of defeating Riser in the raiding game. Well Sasuke-san, I have completed my part of things as required. I believe you were going to give us a rundown on the training, along with your price? Indeed Ryos, let's get right down to it. In order for your peerage to have a chance at beating Riser, you will have to go through a hellish regiment. Every minute you are not at school, you will be with me training. Asia will heal your exhaustion in the morning. This will allow you to train during the night and still be ready for the next day. Sasuke paused at this point to make eye contact with each one of them as he paced in front of their group. I will warn you now, this training will push you well past your physical and emotional limits. Especially you Leone, as the anchor of the team and the most competent fighter. I will have to push you further than anyone else to ensure you can bear the weight of the fight when the time comes. Leone bowed his head. I am no stranger to pain Sasuke-san, I have been trained since birth to someday serve as a bodyguard to the main house. I am honored for this opportunity to serve Ryos-sama. Sasuke nodded briefly. That goes for the rest of you as well. This training will break you at some point considering how soft your lives have been up to now. It's up to you to find the will within yourself to keep going. Are you ready to accept that burden? Ryos and her peerage, minus Leone, all looked rather worried at his exhortation, but nodded their heads in agreement to his words. As for the price to train you, I want you to keep a few things in mind first. By agreeing to train you, I accept the fact that I will register on the radar of the supernatural world much faster than I would prefer. Once this rating game commences, large forces in the devil community will no doubt turn an interested eye to myself and the charges I must protect, making my job doubly hard. Leone and Rios both adopted a neutral expression as they recognized the standard setup tactics. It appeared his asking price would be steep indeed. I am also sacrificing my very valuable time, over 2 months of it, to your cause. If that wasn't enough, I will be teaching you techniques that give you more insight into myself and my own training, giving you more information about myself than I am comfortable with. The only other person I have given this training to is a special case, and is sworn to obey me as a student should. Koneko made a small sound of annoyance as everyone else was obviously similarly tiring of his elaborate sales speech. Sasuke gave them a blank look before continuing his pacing. After a full minute of awkward silence, Rias finally rolled her eyes and asked Sasuke outright. "What is your price, Sasuke-san?" Sasuke stopped pacing and turned to face her fully. "Your hand in marriage will do just fine." Sasuke activated his taijutsu, his evolved Sharingan, ensuring the comical scene would forever be part of his memories. Kiba and Koneko looked very surprised at his proposition, but obviously did not grasp the gravity of the situation. They looked on with the same surprised bemusement they would have if Sasuke was a standard high schooler asking Rias to be his girlfriend or something similarly mundane. Both Issei and Akano wore identical looks of lust as they stared out in the distance, tittering to themselves, doubtless lost in some lewd fantasies. Leone, who very much did grasp the gravity of things, looked completely floored while resting his hand on his sword surely on instinct. Asia had a very brief look of jealousy before simply looking at Saint Salma and pouting. Rias had a curious expression on her face, complete shock ward with what Sasuke would swear was satisfaction before her expression went entirely neutral. "Surely this is a joke, Sasuke-san? Putting aside our brief time knowing each other and your current contract with me, what you suggest is completely impossible." "Oh? And why is that?" Rios snorted. "Where would you like me to start? First, you're a human, that pretty much disqualifies you from marrying most devils from the stigma alone. Secondly, and not to be rude, you're essentially a nobody in terms of family status. In the very small likelihood that your species could be overlooked, only a pedigree of the highest rank would be considered, such as the ruler of an entire country. Those initial obstacles are insurmountable. If that wasn't enough though, why on earth would I go along with marrying you? Surely you haven't forgotten the details of our current contract that essentially forces me to override my initial hostility with you?" Sasuke let her finish before he spoke in a measured tone. "Don't get the wrong idea here, I'm not a fool or a boy that pursues you for your obviously attractive features. What I'm proposing is strictly business and could serve to profit us both greatly." Rios perked up, obviously interested now. "For all that you devils claim to be superior to humans, it's endlessly amusing to me that you still treat the marriage of your elite class similarly to what we humans practiced in the Middle Ages. I'm sure that female devils are able to wield significant power through their husbands, but at the end of the day it is still clear to me that they are expected to be subservient, or would you disagree?" Rias shook her head. "It depends on the family the woman is marrying into. A good family such as Grimmery House allows women to express themselves or even be the dominant party, much as my brother and his wife Praktos. Certainly, there are plenty of old blood houses like the Phoenixes though that allow for more liberal treatment of their wives, assuming they are unable to defend themselves. From what I understand, Lady Phoenix was quite the hellraiser in her youth and laid down the law fairly quickly with a young Lord Phoenix, leading to a fairly equitable relationship to this day. Unfortunately, that would never be an option with Riser. He would either break me or I would have to kill him and try to escape." Sasuke nodded to himself. "Interesting, though neither here nor there. While I'm sure you are not averse to finding a partner among the devil elites one day, I'm guessing that there are few unclaimed prospects in your current generational pool. Otherwise I'm sure you would have brought a more palatable option to your parents at some point. More importantly though, I'm certain both yourself and Sona would prefer to not put your lives on hold and get married to some young lord that theoretically has the power to completely uproot your life. I'm instead giving you the option to walk your own path." Rios stiffened in shock. "So, you plan to make the same offer to Sona then?" Sasuke inclined his head. "Indeed, though I still plan to let that pot simmer for now. I'm sure that she will make the connection herself when you let her know about my offer to you, even if our contract forbids you from expressly telling her of my eventual intentions toward her. There is no rush on that front. It would actually be more beneficial to let our own potential arrangement play out for a few years and discover its practical utility before I consider going to Sona with a similar offer." Rios still looked skeptical. "What would be the point of it then, even if by some miracle we were able to pull it off?" Sasuke raised an eyebrow. "Isn't it obvious? As current allies, such a partnership would allow us greater cohesion in working together on problems. Most importantly for you, it will solve the problem of your parents setting you up with trash like Riser after we have removed him from the board. Make no mistake, there will always be another Riser out there looking to marry you for what you represent, a direct and vital link to the Devil's current leader. It's likely no secret that you have your brother wrapped around your little finger, thus, by controlling you they can wield great power over your nation by proxy." Rios looked like she was gradually warming to the idea. "We would have to make a new contract. I would of course demand that any bedroom actions be completely consensual, and that you would claim no rights over my freedom at any point. Those are just the things I can think of off the top of my head. Of course, I doubt that this will ever be anything other than a platonic relationship, so have no fear on that front. I suppose this new contract would invalidate our existing terms, but we can go over all the logistics later. I assume that your willingness to approach the negotiation table means that you are interested in the idea." Rios nodded. "Yes, assuming by some absolute miracle you are able to pull off both acquiring the acceptance of my parents and not disgracing the family by this arrangement, I am open to the idea." It was at this moment Leone had enough. "Surely this is a joke, Rios-sama. You can't mean to consider marrying this human of all people, no matter the terms. I certainly won't forget your story of how he treated you before your contract was in place. You would trust a man such as this with your future?" Rios turned to Leone. "Quiet, Leone, you will abide by my judgment in this. Given your genuine concern for my welfare, I will say this: I have come to trust Sasuke-san to a degree. He can be ruthless with his enemies and we certainly got off to a bad start, but I believe his redeeming qualities outweigh the bad. Besides, would you rather me be some sort of perverted slave to Riser?" Steel entered Leone's voice. "I would never allow that trash to touch one of my blood. He would die by my blade before he touched you, Rios-sama, even at the cost of my life." "And what then? As Sasuke and Sona have both pointed out, I would still have to fend off suitors that would likely be even lower quality than Riser, considering I would have essentially killed my first husband at that stage. Only the truly greedy and domineering would be interested at that point and my parents' hands would be tied. No, Sasuke's solution does solve many of my current problems." Rios turned back to Sasuke. "I am quite curious as to how you plan to convince both my family and the Devil world why you should be allowed to marry me." Sasuke gave her a measured look. "That's the easy part, will I?" Rios raised an eyebrow. "Oh? We just lie to some of the most powerful beings in the world? And what are we lying to them about?" "My pedigree. We need to find some way to make me look like a devil lord without me actually having to transform into a devil. Documents can be forged, lineages can be created, but the only snag I see is the oral identification. I am powerful, but I assume each devil lord's aura is both unique and distinctly demonic in nature." Rios nodded. "Yes, to both accounts. The paper trail may not be as simple as you think, especially since most of the remaining lords associate with each other regularly. Sona may be able to assist with that portion though. She owes me a few favors, and with her connections we could probably get a convincing alias set up." "What about the aura? Do you know of any way to manufacture one?" Rios shook her head. It would be very difficult to manufacture a standard devil aura, much less a pillar lord's. The aura would have to be completely ironclad. Are you certain you wouldn't consider becoming a devil? Given your power now as a human, you might be able to claim one of the old pillars in truth after you change to a devil. So long as you were truly a devil and powerful enough to make it stick, nobody would really challenge you. No, at this stage I will remain a human. While more power is tempting, I do have my own pride as an Uchiha to consider. We must find someone with the skills to make this work, someone truly genius at crafting. Rios lit up. There is one person who may be able to help us with this, my niece and best friend Beelzebub. If anyone could create what you are looking for, it would be him. Sasuke nodded. Very well then, you agree to reach out to Beelzebub as soon as we resolve the riser situation, and to eventually marry me under the conditions we have discussed, assuming that we can come to an equitable agreement of terms? I do. As Rias agreed, both she and Sasuke felt a twinge as their current contract made note of the new amendment. Sasuke clapped his hands together once in satisfaction. Excellent, now that is taken care of, we might as well start the training. Sasuke immediately started barking orders. Issei, go join the boys for your usual rounds. If you run into trouble call, but for no other reason. Asia-chan, you are with me until the rating game. We will inform Sona of the change and have her accompany us during the training so she can continue instructing you while you heal the new trainees. Yes, sensei. Of course, Saint Sama. Rias and her peerage suddenly looked concerned. Sasuke-san, why will Asia-chan need to be on hand during the training? I thought she was going to heal our exhaustion after training in the mornings. Sasuke smiled with his teeth in full view. Well, she's there to make sure you don't die. The faces of the assembled peerage paled save for Leone, who just looked determined. Sasuke paced in front of his new recruits briefly. I already warned you once, be prepared for this. Don't think that some light training is going to make you ready to face a veteran squad in less than 2 months. The best I can do is give you a chance, it's up to you to make that chance count. Sasuke nodded at Rias. Rias, if you would. Rias created a teleport circle to the training grounds they had met the previous day. Sasuke smirked as they all teleported to what they would soon see as hell. This would be fun. The first week, Sasuke beat them black and blue, repeatedly. Channeling his inner Kakashi, Sasuke assumed a bored pose as the peerage threw their all at him, desperate to put the hurt on the man that had turned their existence into a living nightmare. Sasuke would on occasion have to get moderately serious when Leone rallied the peerage and went for a kill shot while Rias and Akano used a combination attack. For a split second, Sasuke would use his real speed to incapacitate Leone and Kiba before dodging the death ball and leisurely continuing to the rest of the peerage that was scrambling to attack him. Issei seemed to get a kick out of watching someone other than himself get tortured daily. Some days, Sasuke would catch him smirking during his assigned exercises and have him join the attacking peerage in getting their asses handed to them. It wouldn't do for his disciple to get too complacent after all. A week's training saw some impressive work in their team cohesion, with even Rias deferring to Leone for battle tactics by the end of the week. On the 8th day, Sasuke began throwing genjutsus into the mix. The team had faltered badly the first few days as visions of their dying teammates sent them into panic and made them easy targets for Sasuke's attacks. As they started getting used to the visions and learned to mentally harden themselves, Sasuke left the horrible visions in the mix and continued on with physical training for the next few weeks. By week 5, Sasuke was impressed despite himself at their improvement. They were starting to act like a squad, even ignoring the horrendous genjutsus that showed their friends or loved ones dying right beside them at times. After 7 weeks of hellish training, Sasuke laid off and had them go over film and run strategy. They still sparred every day with him and occasionally each other, but he did not push them to the breaking point every day. Each day, Sasuke went over a different piece of Riser's peerage. He focused on the Bomb Queen especially. She would likely be the hardest opponent the squad would face besides Riser himself. As Sona was there supervising Asia's training the whole time, Sasuke went over the rulebook with her and found a very interesting clause that may be enough to push Rias and her team to victory. Hopefully it would not be needed though. As the final week rolled to an end, the day of the raiding game came up. Sasuke was allowed to attend the match with them as one of their servants. Sasuke had insisted being listed as such on the official roster, much to the amusement and chagrin of the devils. Anyone who saw Sasuke as a mere servant wouldn't live long enough to tell the tale. Finally, the moment had arrived. The peerage sat in silence as they all stared into space, deep into their pre-battle jitters. While Sasuke had a hard time taking the whole thing seriously since no one would actually die, it was the highest stakes battle the young devils had faced thus far. The outcome could very well determine the course of the rest of their lives, especially for Rias. It was obvious they needed a bit of encouragement. I'll not say much, as that was always my now deceased best friend's strong suit. There were some brief looks of shock among the devils. Sasuke never discussed his past. Think about your training, about what you have sacrificed to get here. Sasuke could see a course of grimaces at the reminder of the training. Realize that the enemy deserves no mercy, just as you shall receive none. Do not hesitate to kill, as your own life hangs in the balance. This may be a mock battle, but do not think for a second that your very lives are not on the line. Should Rias fall under Riser's rule, you do not want to know what he will likely do with you. Sasuke could tell his point hit home as all of the assembled eyes hardened, especially Leone's. Trust in your teammates and most importantly yourselves, even as you believed in me to get you to this point. Sasuke faded back into the shadows of the room, uncomfortable with his short speech but surprised that it seemingly had the desired effect. Rias and her peerage seemed harder and more focused even as the bells began to toll inside the stadium, a signal for the attendees to enter the stadium. It's time. That's it, goodbye everyone. Feel free to comment for a part 4.